guys. Happy February. Welcome to another episode of Evolve. I am your host, Monette Brann-Natta. And to get us kicked off in this month of love, I would like to sprinkle a little love onto some friends and helpers in my life. Firstly, I would like to thank Bob, if you're listening, for making that video that helped me to figure out the terrible thing called links. I so appreciate you taking the time to do that. If you know me, guys and listeners, I'm a little bit technically challenged. Sometimes I can do a lot of things, but I kind of push that aside. So I have been getting like a crash course in all of this stuff in order to better communicate and stay in touch with you guys. So thank you, Bob. I so appreciate your efforts and kindness there. And also I'd like to sprinkle a little love onto Miss Elaine Bartlett. Elaine is a teacher and she calls herself the reluctant or no longer reluctant mystic after her show yesterday. She has a show here on the Talk Network radio stations and she absolutely is brilliant. She is a calming presence and she is insightful and wise. And if you've ever heard that show, Delilah, Elaine has a voice. It's kind of reminiscent of that. You could really just listen to her talk all day. So give her a little love and a listen, and you'd be surprised. She'll have some food for you. I promise you that. So recently, I was having a conversation with a friend about the assembly of our yearly vision boards, and she was sharing with me some of the wonderful bits and bobs that she'd found in her magazine. And one of the phrases that she said popped out to her was to be your own advocate. And this particular friend is a warrior with the Archangel Michael as her personal escort through life. And he does a lot of cutting of cords and breaking of chains and all that stuff. And he is bold and strong. And so this clipping completely resonated with her spirit. But it got me to thinking, be your own advocate. How kind it is to be your own advocate. How loving it is, how necessary. In this month of love, we all have heard that it's just a fabricated holiday to sell more cards and candy, but I believe that everything does and can serve a purpose. And so I've been in meditation and prayer about this month, and I have a few interesting interviews lined up, and I plan to take us full circle throughout the phases and various names of love, starting with Eros, which was all about the Greek god of love and sexual desire. And Eros is mainly based on attraction, and it's actually where the term erotica comes from. The second one is philia, and it's the love of the mind, also known as brotherly love. Think about Philadelphia. That's where the roots of that city's name come from. And it represents a sincere and platonic love. And that's a love you have for a brother or a really good friend. And it's more valuable usually and more cherished than Eros because it exists when people share similar values and dispositions. So that's the thing to know about philia. Ludus is playful love. It's a flirtatious and teasing kind of love that mostly is accompanied by dancing or laughter. It's a very childlike and fun kind of love. And then there's pragma for pragmatism. That's long-standing love. This is the everlasting love that married people share after years of being together. Even if sometimes you might think, I don't know, you're there developing this love that's called pragma. It is pragmatic, and that is why it is referred to as standing in love rather than falling in love, because it grows over time, and it requires profound understanding between lovers who've been together for many years. There is agape, love of the soul. This is a selfless kind of love for humanity. It is the closest to unconditional, and it is a love you give without expecting anything in return. This love does not require a norm of reciprocity. It helps us to sympathize, and it helps us to connect with people that we don't know. There's also storge, which is the love that a parent has for a child, or the love of a child. It is based on natural feelings of effortless love. Storge is also known as forgiveness, acceptance, and sacrifice. It is one that makes you feel very secure and comfortable. And then there is Fallujah, and that is the love of self. And this week, we're going to focus on Fallujah. which is really the sum of all the other various types of love. What is often said is that in order to love anybody, you have to love yourself. Well, that is exactly what Fallujah is all about. Truly, madly, deeply respecting and loving yourself. And the ancient Greeks divided Fallujah into two kinds of love. There was one that was pure and selfish and seeks pleasure and fame and wealth, and it often leads to narcissism. And then there's another healthy kind of love that we give ourselves. Fallujah is essential for any relationship. We can only love others if we truly love ourselves, and we can only care for others if we can truly care for ourselves. The balanced kind of Fallujah is the type of love that I wish that I had for myself in my younger years. I believe that if that love had existed in my spirit, that perhaps I would not have fallen vulnerable and been into the clutches of a cult. Over the holiday season, a new show became very popular. It did not become popular because it was an endearing rom-com or a hilarious comedy. It struck a chord because it took us inside a once secretive religion and revealed that it was really a cult in masquerade. Leah Remini spearheaded this, and she really has done so with bravery and honesty. And at the start of each show, she read aloud a statement from the church that once embraced her. Except in the statement, they are defaming her. And she sits in her crisp white shirt against a stark backdrop, the contrast of which is not a coincidence, at least not by my estimation, because what Miss Remini is doing is shining a light into the world that is all-consuming and cloaked in utter darkness. There has been a lot of noise from the Church of Scientology that this is just another show like the many that Miss Remini has been on throughout her career. But I beg to differ, because what I am watching is authentic. I know it is authentic because it triggered me. I'm aware that it's produced because it's a show. It has to be produced. I can see that clearly, but the raw emotion of the fellow quote-unquote suppressive persons that Leah and her team interact with is not cultivated. It is organic. Even in the moments when she is in full fight mode for those she's trying to protect, Leah slips back into the tenets of a religion that once swaddled her, even as it stripped her of her esteem, emptied her bank accounts, and gaslit her observations. I recognize that shell shock, listeners, because my own shell has been shocked before. I know what a cult looks like because I have been in a cult. What Leah Remini and thousands of others have been subjected to is all too real to me, except mine didn't come cloaked in nautical themes, and it didn't have the glittering light of celebrity around it. I didn't go clear. I was not a Scientologist, but I did go backwards, and I forgot for a moment how strong I am. I have never spoken about my experience except with the persons who were there to witness the effects it had on me and who had their own experiences. I've most certainly not spoken about it publicly, and even as I was writing and thinking and preparing for the show, little fear crept up in my stomach. What if the person that was ahead of the cult I was in somehow, even though I have no connections at all today, heard this? And that's how you know you've really been affected by a situation. So, I'm here. I'm watching Leah do this, and I feel her crusade. I felt it was important to pick up my own torch and to shed some light on the anatomy of a cult. But let me preface this by saying I am no expert. But, as you may witness if you should watch her riveting documentary, there's a certain obsession that you develop once you leave a cult, or more appropriately, the obsession you have within the cult transfers to the why about the cult. You wonder, how could this have happened to you? How did you get here? And what can you do to prevent such a thing from ever happening to you or anyone you love ever again? And that is where we begin. At the very beginning. A very good place to start. I was 21 years old, and I was hiding out from the heat in Atlanta, Georgia at Six Flags, hiding out from the heat in a cafe, trying to get a nice coffee. I was there with a group of friends celebrating and having a good time and riding the rides. And I saw a guy across the cafe. He kept making eyes at me, and I thought, that's weird. He was older than me, and I thought, why is he looking at me like that? And I remember he was sitting in the sun, and the sun was kind of hitting his face, and there was a glint. I later found out it was a cataract, but there was this glint, and it was kind of a little dangerous, a little alluring, and I thought, that's weird, a little creepy. But I kept looking down into my iced coffee, and I wasn't paying attention. And then he got up, like in a movie. He got up, he came over to me, he sat down. He didn't ask for permission to sit down. He just sat down, and he said to me, I think you have a calling on your life to work with children. I've been watching you from across the restaurant, and God was speaking to me, and he told me that you have a calling on your life to work with children. And I thought, that's interesting. I had been studying early childhood education and all of that stuff, and I just thought, wow, me loving synchronicity, this is an interesting thing. I was still learning how to develop my intuition at that time. And he talks to me, and he gives me his card, and he says, is it okay if I contact you? And he tells me he's a youth group pastor of an interracial youth group. This guy was a Caucasian guy. And he says, listen, there's a place for you and whatever. But at the time, I'm living in Atlanta. I'm going through the throes of a difficult breakup, and I'm not thinking about going with him, who he was a state away. He lived in Alabama. And so he said, let me just talk to you. And so over the next year, as the breakup was happening, it was that, the love of your life breakup where you think, oh, how can I go on? And so he called me and would just check on me randomly as I was moving into my own place. And during the summertime when I was teaching a creative writing program for inner city youth. And I just thought, how lovely, how kind of him. I had grown up with Christianity and in churches, so I was familiar with pastors and youth pastors especially. And I thought, what a charismatic guy. Key word there. And I guess we'll play a little game while we're doing this show today. I want you to count the red flags and see if you don't end up with like a flame of red flags running down the road by the time we're done. When would you have run? How many flags would it have taken for you? And I consider myself a thinking person, but I allowed us to develop this relationship. He even told me, read Sun Tzu, The Art of War, so that you can understand the mechanism of this breakup and you can understand why it's happening. And so he was very, I thought, helpful. What I know now is that he was grooming me. Okay, so we start there. Psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton, who once taught at Harvard Medical School, wrote a paper titled Cult Formation in the early 80s. He delineated 3 primary characteristics which were the most common features shared by destructive cults. And the first one is a charismatic leader who increasingly becomes the object of worship, and his general principles may have originally sustained the group, but then he loses power. And he is the only person, it's usually a living leader, and he has no meaningful accountability, since the single most thing is if you are defiant, then you cannot stand. And I remember that when I first got there, and before I tell you, let me tell you how I got there. After that breakup was going on, and I was living in this city, essentially at this point by myself, he called me and he said, what if I told you I had a place for you to come? What if I told you you could finally be in your calling fully? I know you're teaching this program to inner city youth, but that was a grant written program and I had shared that with him. So it was only for the summer. And he was like, I have a way that you can do this all the time. I can make sure you have a storage unit. I can make sure people come move you in a proper U-Haul truck so all your furniture can come. You won't have papers in it. Everything will be great. And I have a job for you and a place to live. Well, I was 21 and pretty adventurous, and I ran it by my then friend and mentor, who was a professor at the college, who had written the grant for the program I was teaching. And she, not really, she talked to him on the phone, and she said, you know what, take a chance. You're young. This is kind of what life is about. She told me about her experiences in the 60s, and I thought, sure. So I allowed that to happen. And that is where I kind of blame myself.